Hi, I just want to begin by stating thank you to everybody who made this conference a possibility. It's an honor, and I'm very excited to be here and to be in dialogue and conversation with everybody. I especially want to thank Lina del Castillo and Paloma Diaz, as well as the Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies and the Benson Library at UT Austin, as well as all other institutes, departments, and individuals who made this event happen. So rather than focus in the 20 minutes I have on the paper that I will soon be submitting, I really want to delve into one aspect of that paper that I end with, which is really about present day grassroots and community-based initiatives to archive erotica for its historical value. As I mentioned in the paper, this paper is part of a much larger twofold project tentatively titled Archiving the Obscene: Censorship, Pornography, and Erotica in Latin America from 1700 to 1955. To 1955. And this project is twofold in the sense that I expect it to culminate in a traditional scholarly monograph, as well as in a open access bilingual Spanish and English digital archive or repository that in many ways has become the necessary precondition for the research itself. So let me screen share here really quickly, screen share everything. Because I really want to, begin talking about the paper itself, as you'll read, is sort of oriented around this 1955 public burning by a group of conservative Catholic students of thousands of magazines, pornographic or immoral magazines. And I put this image here, not because I want to delve into it. I delve into this event in the paper quite a bit, but really just to position myself and present day collecting and archiving practices, community-based practices around this question of archival absence. It's sort of a fact that most erotica and pornography of the past is long lost, either because it has been neglected as a record with historical value or worth, or because it has been willfully destroyed, as in the case of 1955, or because it has been discarded. One of the things I will be talking about in a couple of minutes is my sort of long-term work with a Mexico City community-based archives called Archivo El Insulto, with whom I've been collaborating over the course of the last 5 or 6 years toward the collecting and preservation, physical preservation, and digital archiving of historical erotica and pornography that is circulated in Mexico over the course of the 20th century. But really, this digital archive, as I mentioned, is an ongoing and deeply collaborative project that is engaging not simply, me as the researcher and archives and archivists, but also sort of popular collectors and book dealers and antiques market vendors. And this is really a project that in contrast to my earlier work, which very much began in the colonial archives and sustained itself throughout the colonial archives, this project really began in La Lagunilla in Mexico City, especially in the Sunday antiques market. And I just have this image up here. I talked about this very briefly in the paper, but you see these are just different vendors' wares, and you see the types of erotic photography that circulate today from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, still in these antiques markets. And this is a picture of a Super 8 pornographic film from the 60s that I eventually ended up donating to archivists, to the archive, Filmoteca de la UNAM. So I talk about this a little bit in the paper and in sort of other work that I've developed around this project in an article that came out in the Journal of Popular Culture last year. But I want to jump ahead and really talk about, these grassroots archival initiatives. And I'm very much, as I mentioned, if you go to elinsulto.com, you come across the page, the official page of Archivo El Insulto. And I really love, the work, the community work that Archivo El Insulto has been doing. We get a sense, if we delve into the archive, just the archive tab, we get a sense of the goals of Archivo El Insulto. And I really love the way way that they're positioning this project as a political project, as an effective project, and as an archival and artistic project. So they tell us, El Insulto es una plataforma artística. I think the subtitles here will not work, but El Insulto es una plataforma artística de Ciudad de México dedicada al rescate, conservación y difusión de documentos de la cultura sexual en circulación en México durante el siglo XX. And my sort of favorite part here is that they see this archive, Archivo El Insulto, as una respuesta política a la ausencia de un archivo en México al que uno puede ir a enfrentarse con el pasado erótico y activar las relaciones afectivas con los materiales. And this is really what Archivo El Insulto aims and seeks to do in all of its work. And I'll sort of talk a little bit about their display practices and their exhibition practices in a minute. But let me delve in very briefly. Archivo El Insulto collects a range of different genres of erotica and documents. We have photographs from the early 20th century, photographs and postcards up until the 1980s, books about sexual hygiene and sexology and erotic fiction, which I'll be talking about quite a bit. Physique magazines published in Mexico in Spanish, but based on or translations of those that had circulated in parts of North America and Europe, and a range of other foreign publications or international publications, such as even BDSM and fetish magazines that circulated in Mexico, throughout the 20th century. I want to focus for several minutes on one particular collection of Archivo El Insulto. And this is a physical box called Caja Daniel. And the box is called that because it literally has the name Daniel scribbled on it. And this is a box that the founder of Archivo El Insulto, Adolfo Vega, purchased a couple of years ago at a bookstore in Mexico City. And this box itself is fascinating. And our current material and digital archival efforts have been dedicated to describing, cataloging, classifying, and producing digital surrogates for this corpus of about 45 books from 1900 to, I believe, 1955. And this is just this is just one image I took in the physical spaces of the archives to give you a sense of the types of texts that are here. A lot of our work in recent actually this past summer was producing a Dublin core-based inventory of all of the books in this physical box, Caja Daniel. And I just put this the CSV file up here as an example of some of the work that we have been doing. So we have, for example, the 41 books in the collection or in the box. We have sometimes the very long-winded titles of these books. Largely apocryphal information, but crucial information nonetheless about publisher, date, place of publication, and we have other sorts of descriptions and connections by and through this really preliminary inventory and catalog, which again is really the starting point for what we hope will become the digital repository of Archivo El Insulto. But let me return really quickly to the box itself. The box and the collecting of erotica and pornography, I think, is so phenomenally valuable, especially when we think about trying to better understand how these objects were produced, were circulated, and were read or consumed and used or sometimes misused by their publics. This project, my larger project, is very much interested as well in sort of tracing connections between institutional archives and grassroots archiving and popular collections and collecting practices, especially as they come to be oriented around erotica and pornography. But I mention this here because these types of erotic fiction books are they're relatively few and far between. They're difficult to come by in rare bookstores. They're difficult to come by in antiques markets or flea markets. And that's why this purchase of 41, 42 fiction books by Adolfo Vega, several years ago, is so fascinating and so important, especially when we place some of the material objects in dialogue with similar objects that exist in other archives. So the National Archives of Mexico, the Archivo General de la Nación, does not strategically collect erotica or pornography in any sustained way. But we do find several files or expedientes dealing with, ataques a la moral pública, or pornography, censorship, etc., in which relatively rare print objects or books were conserved as part of the file or the expediente as evidence of a crime, evidence of a transgression. I have several instances of this. This is a 1937 criminal case against a Spanish book dealer, Amadeo Perez Mendoza, who had a sort of pornographic empire over the course of several decades in the 1930s, 40s, and early 50s. But you see here this sort of juxtaposition of body and text. And I think this is just a fascinating image in that we get right behind the title page of the file, we get the actual magazine Forma that Amadeo Perez Mendoza himself produced in the 1930s, preserved as evidence. And what's so fascinating to me is that this magazine is the only issue of Forma that I have thus far been able to encounter in many, many years of searching for and seeking out these types of publications. So the mainstream archives are crucially important in this type of preservation and collecting practice. But again, the collecting practices of the police in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s were to use these images, presumably as to use these objects and books and magazines as evidence of a crime. So this takes me back to this 1939 case, and this is a criminal trial against individuals for having challenged public morality through the purchasing and selling of pornography. And what is so fascinating to me about this particular trial is that, again, as part of the evidence produced, the National Archives preserves in the case file itself this erotic fiction novelette with explicitly pornographic chromolithographs. And this is called La Reina de la Lujuria, or the Queen of Lust. And what is so interesting to me is that the National Archives copy of this book is a single printed copy of about 40 pages, largely text with several pornographic either photographs or chromolithographs. And you sort of see some of the physical markings, whether it's archivists or users who have purposefully or accidentally, marked this book up with pen. You see the stamp of the National Archives. But what I find so compelling is that the Archivo El Insulto, as part of Caja Daniel, also contains this very same publication. But the publication is both similar and different. Different in the sense that, in comparison or contrast to the National Archives preserved copy, Archivo El Insulto's copy is actually a copy that has been stapled into a larger sort of file of several pornographic novelettes from the 1930s and 40s. And you have other books like Las Siete Posiciones, La Reina de la Lujuria, and several other texts and books, modelos de perversión, that are all sort of affixed in this one book, or this one material object. But why this is so interesting is to be able to make comparisons around paper quality, comparisons around image quality, printing process, and also material markings and marginalia in the images and the books themselves. So this is sort of just a really interesting comparison that I offer between Archivo El Insulto's copy on the right and the National Archives copy, where somebody again has physically taken a pen and marked, marked this image to produce what is a cross, on the back and buttocks and genitalia of these two individuals. I'm really, let me just jump ship here and go back to Archivo El Insulto and to our ongoing kind of digital initiatives and digital archiving work. So, I have been deeply inspired, as have my colleagues, Adolfo Vega and Michelle Davao at Archivo El Insulto, by scholars such as Maite Zubiaurre, who several years ago published Cultures of the Erotic in Spain and produced a phenomenal Omeka digital repository or digital archive, a virtual Wunderkammer, earlier 20th century erotica in Spain, whereby, Maite Zubiaurre has uploaded hundreds and hundreds of images and erotic magazines and erotic novelettes and essays on sexuality, sexology, eugenics, nudism, etc. So this in some ways is really a model, a sort of preliminary model for thinking about the types of digital archiving of erotica and pornography that we, I myself, and collaboratively with Archivo El Insulto can do. So to this end, I really want to talk a little bit about some of these ongoing efforts. So just this year, I have been starting to play around, and you can check the website, but it's actually not activated right now. It's not publicly available. But this is really just us playing around, or me playing around with digital collections and digital repositories of erotica and pornography. I've only, again, this is like the preliminary step to what many years from now will be a public and open access digital archive or repository. But I sort of, I want to share this very briefly to kind of talk a little bit about what is at stake in digitally archiving these types of objects and records, and for whom is this archiving carried out. So really, this is a project, archiving the obscene, as well as the work of Archivo El Insulto, is geared toward making publicly available previously and largely neglected records and documents and images for the benefit of students, researchers, teachers, professors, archivists, artists, and collectors and other members of society who can find some sort of pedagogical or historical or cultural use out of these records. And here I have just, you can sort of get a sense of how we've been working with Dublin Core. This is a series of photocopies of Mexican Inquisition files that I inherited from Dr. Lee Penyak. You just get a little bit of a sense here of how uploading and producing these types of images or these types of records plays itself out in terms of Dublin Core, title, subject, description, creator, source, dates, contributor type, etc. And the idea in the larger project, or the ongoing future project, is that users will be able, for example, to click on this page and it will take you to a full digitization of the entire not only the photographs of the Inquisition trials themselves, but all of the other marginalia and transcriptions that Dr. Penyak produced many decades ago. So this is sort of one aspect of the colonial, and you just get a sense here of the types of erotica or pornography that were produced in the 18th century, for selling profane dolls and porcelain figurines, for selling indecent images, for selling obscene snuff boxes, dishonest paintings, etc. This individual, which I talk about in the paper, who is put on trial for having a reloj or a watch that contains an obscene painting. I see that my time is almost up, and I really want to move from this collection of 18th century Mexican Inquisition trials to the Caja Daniel. And again, you could get a sense here of how I'm sort of trying to place in conversation the CSV file, or this early inventory and catalog of these records, with a sort of early digital instantiation of these things. So here, if you just jump into this page, you get, Spanish language erotic fiction novels or novelettes from 1940s and 50s from Spain and Latin America. And here, I've just opened up a couple of pages here to give examples. Okay, so this is one of my preferable, one of my favorites, but Biblioteca Las Novelas de la Lujuria, de cómo fogaban en la casa parroquial, supposedly printed in London and Madrid in 1900. Again, these are very likely apocryphal for a whole series of reasons, but you get a sense of what some of these, I want people here to get a sense of some of the materiality of these books and these images. So again, this is one book in the collection that is found in the physical box Caja Daniel in Archivo El Insulto. And we're in the process of securing funding to professionally digitize everything in Archivo El Insulto's collections. But here we just have preliminary digitizations, digital photographs to kind of show in many ways the images, the queerness, the sharing, and the different types, the diversity of bodies and desires that are sort of coming up in these particular images. So again, I think, what's so fascinating for me to think about, especially around collecting practices in relation to this project, are the ways that these objects were in theory marketed for, heteronormative or potentially heterosexual men. But when you delve into these records themselves, you find a sort of diversity of bodies and desires and corporeality that is in so many ways, I think, queer, and challenges those sort of heteronormative readings of the production and circulation of erotica and pornography in the past. And I'll just conclude by saying here, well, I know I'm over my 20 minutes, but let me just jump very quickly into to some of the praxis of Archivo El Insulto, which I find particularly compelling and interesting. So Archivo El Insulto, collects vintage erotica and pornography that is circulated in Mexico in its archives, but it also has very different protocols from mainstream or institutional archives in the United States or in Mexico or elsewhere. And I say this because Archivo El Insulto orients its own archival praxis around encounter and sort of bodily encounters, intellectual encounters, political encounters, and sexual encounters through and with the records that they themselves collect. So this is sort of pre-pandemic, but in 2019, early 2020, Archivo El Insulto staged several interactive displays in independent art spaces like La Postal in Mexico City. And this was from November, December of 2019, where they put forth this fascinating project, Se Ruega Tocar, Intimar con las Memorias del Deseo, in which they took the physical materials from the archives and spread them around, this independent art space, in order to invite users and readers and members of the public to engage with these objects in a very different way than one might engage them in, in the reading room of an archive. So the, Archivo El Insulto basically invited people to flirt and laugh and play and discuss and interact with the material records and the images they themselves contained, but also as part of this event, staged conversations and sort of, roundtables with LGBTQ activists in Mexico City and with the Alianza de Trabajadoras Sexuales de Mexico, or the sort of a sex workers alliance in Mexico City, who were brought into the space and to this event to reflect on, the images themselves, the representations of bodies and desire and sexuality within these images. So this is just one example of one of the events that are, or displays that Archivo El Insulto has put on. In another one, which I talk a little bit about in a previous publication, they sort of take erotic postcards from the 19 teens and 1920s, and again, in an independent art space / bookstore, spread these images around the room on a wall with a little curtain, in front of each image. And each, as sort of display or museum goers, it's not a museum, exhibit goers, orient themselves around the room and sort of look at and reflect on what each postcard contains, the bodies, the sexualities, the desires. As they sort of get to the end of the exhibits, the final opening simply has a mirror and sort of, asks, exhibit goers to reflect on their own status, their own positionality, both as a spectator, as a user, and as a consumer of erotic imagery in the past and in the present. And again, this was an initial attempt at a 20-minute presentation that went far over. But I really just wanted to give you a sense, a little bit of a better sense of my work with Archivo El Insulto, ongoing work that several years from now will culminate in an open access digital archive that, again, is deeply related and interconnected to my own larger research project, Archiving the Obscene in Latin America. And with that, I stop. I hope that this short presentation intersects nicely with the paper itself. This presentation went into other areas that the paper itself does not go into. But again, in the larger project, I'm really looking for and trying to seek out the points of interconnection between the late colonial period, the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the archival initiatives, both by the National Archives, by Archivo El Insulto, and by the Filmoteca de la UNAM in the present. And again, as these things orient around collecting of erotica and pornography. So thank you so much, and I look forward to our conversations.